The sun was setting over the bustling shopping district of Atlanta, casting long shadows between the high-end boutiques and restaurants that lined the streets. Officer James Barrett drummed his fingers on his patrol car's steering wheel, his mind wandering to the upcoming poker game he'd organized with his fellow officers later that night. That's when he spotted it. A gleaming black Mercedes-Benz S-Class, its metallic paint catching the golden hour light as it smoothly pulled into a parking spot near the shopping center's main entrance. Behind the wheel sat Dr. Maya Williams, her silk blouse and tailored blazer marking her as someone heading to a professional engagement. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, adjusting her glasses and making sure she looked presentable for the medical conference where she was scheduled to give a keynote speech about the latest advancements in neurosurgery. Barrett's eyes narrowed as he watched her gather her presentation materials from the passenger seat. Something didn't sit right with him, or rather, something wasn't sitting right in his prejudiced mind. In his 15 years on the force, he'd developed what he called intuition, but what his supervisors had repeatedly warned him was nothing more than racial profiling. His personnel file was thick with civilian complaints and written warnings, each one dismissed by Barrett as people being too sensitive these days. The cool evening air carried the sound of distant traffic and the gentle chatter of shoppers as Dr. Williams stepped out of her car. She was running through her presentation points in her head, mentally preparing for the audience of 300 medical professionals who would be attending her talk. The conference organizers had specifically requested her presence, given her groundbreaking research in minimally invasive brain surgery techniques. Barrett slowly pulled his patrol car out of its hiding spot between two delivery vans. He'd been reprimanded just last week for similar behavior, stopping drivers without probable cause. His sergeant had been crystal clear: one more complaint, and he'd be facing serious consequences. But Barrett couldn't help himself. He was convinced he was right this time, just like he thought he was right all the other times. Dr. Williams was checking her phone, responding to a last-minute email from her surgical team about a patient's successful recovery, when she noticed Barrett's reflection in her car window. She felt her stomach tighten, not from guilt, but from experience. As one of the city's top neurosurgeons, she'd faced similar situations before, people assuming she didn't belong, couldn't afford, or shouldn't have the things she'd earned through years of hard work and dedication. A group of shoppers slowed their pace nearby, sensing the tension in the air. One of them, a young law student, discreetly pulled out his phone and began recording. He'd been studying civil rights law and recognized the telltale signs of potential police misconduct. Across the street, the shopping center's security cameras swiveled silently, their digital eyes capturing every moment of what was about to unfold. Barrett approached with the practiced swagger of someone who thought the badge made him untouchable. His hand rested unnecessarily on his holster, a subtle intimidation tactic he perfected over the years. He didn't know that Dr. Williams had just finished a 12-hour surgery that morning, saving the life of a child with a rare brain condition. He didn't know that the Mercedes had been a gift to herself after being appointed head of neurosurgery at Atlanta's top hospital. He didn't know that she served on the hospital's board of directors or that she regularly provided free surgeries for underprivileged patients. All Barrett saw was what he wanted to see, and in 3 minutes, that narrow vision would shatter his career and change the face of local law enforcement forever. The gathering crowd, the whirring security cameras, and the swift approach of justice were about to teach him a lesson he'd never forget. Barrett's footsteps echoed against the pavement as he approached Dr. Williams, who stood calmly beside her car, her conference materials tucked under one arm. The evening breeze carried snippets of nearby conversations that were growing quieter as more people noticed the scene unfolding. The security guard at the shopping center's entrance had already picked up his phone, his years of experience telling him something wasn't right. "License and registration," Barrett demanded, not bothering with the usual police greeting or explanation for the stop. His voice carried that particular edge that spoke of authority used as a weapon rather than a responsibility. The growing crowd of onlookers shifted uncomfortably, their shopping bags forgotten in their hands. Dr. Williams took a slow, steady breath. the same kind she used before making a critical incision in surgery. She'd been here before, had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times. With deliberate movements, she reached into her designer bag and retrieved her wallet. "Officer, I'm happy to provide my documentation," she said, her voice carrying the same calm authority she used in the operating room. "But I'd like to know the reason for this stop." She held out her license, insurance, and registration, all perfectly in order, just like everything else in her meticulously organized life. Barrett snatched the papers, barely glancing at them. The young law student who'd been recording had been joined by others, their phones raised like silent witnesses. The middle-aged couple paused their evening walk, the wife already dialing the police department's non-emergency number. They'd seen Barrett around the neighborhood before, had heard the whispered stories about his conduct. "This vehicle matches the description of a reported stolen car." Barrett lied, the words falling from his mouth with practiced ease. He didn't know that one of the shoppers recording was a retired judge, who raised his eyebrows at the obvious falsehood. There had been no such report, a fact that would come back to haunt Barrett in less than 3 minutes. Dr. Williams stood her ground, hands visible, posture professional. "Officer Barrett," she said, reading his nameplate. "I've owned this vehicle for 2 years. I can call the dealership right now to confirm. I'm running late for a medical conference where I'm the keynote speaker." She reached for her phone, but Barrett's sharp voice cut through the air. "Step away from the vehicle," he ordered, his hand still resting on his holster. The security cameras whirred above, capturing every moment, every abuse of power, every witness's reaction. Inside the shopping center, the security guard was already speaking with his supervisor, describing the scene playing out in their parking lot. More phones emerged from pockets and purses. A local news blogger happened to be picking up coffee at the shopping center and recognized Dr. Williams from a recent charity event where she'd announced a new program providing free medical care to underserved communities. The blogger's fingers flew across her phone's keyboard, live tweeting the incident. "Officer, I'm going to call your supervisor," Dr. Williams said, maintaining her composure even as Barrett moved closer, using his physical presence as intimidation. She'd faced pressure in the operating room that would make most people crumble. This, while infuriating, was nothing compared to holding someone's life in her hands. Barrett reached for her car keys, his face set in what he thought was righteous authority, but what everyone else saw as pure prejudice. "Vehicles being impounded for investigation," he announced, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. He didn't notice one of Dr. Williams's colleagues from the hospital pulling into the parking lot, didn't see the look of recognition and outrage cross their face. The air grew thick with tension, phones kept recording, and justice was about to arrive with the speed and precision of a thunderbolt. Barrett had no idea that in the next 60 seconds, his carefully constructed world of power and privilege would come crashing down around him, all because he chose the wrong person to harass on the wrong evening in front of the wrong crowd. The shopping center's lights flickered on as dusk settled in, casting harsh fluorescent light on a scene that was about to become a turning point in the ongoing conversation about police accountability and racial bias. In just 3 minutes, Officer James Barrett would learn that sometimes justice arrives with perfect timing. The Mercedes's engine purred to life under Barrett's command as he slid into the driver's seat, the leather still warm from Dr. Williams's presence. He adjusted the mirror, catching a glimpse of his own satisfied expression, a look that would vanish in mere moments. The gathered crowd watched in disbelief as he began to pull away, leaving Dr. Williams standing in the parking lot with her conference materials clutched to her chest. What Barrett didn't realize was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. The luxury car he was now driving wasn't just any vehicle. It was equipped with the latest tracking technology, and the car's computer system was already sending its location data to both the manufacturer's security center and Dr. Williams's smartphone. The evening air carried voices of outrage from the onlookers. A young mother explained to her curious child why what they were witnessing was wrong, turning this moment into a teaching opportunity about justice and standing up against unfairness. The retired judge who had been watching pulled out his phone and dialed an old colleague who now worked in the police department's internal affairs division. Dr. Williams maintained her composure, though her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. Her colleague from the hospital, Dr. Chen, rushed over from his car. As the head of the hospital's ethics committee, he had seen his fair share of injustice, but this was different. This was happening to someone he knew and respected, someone who had saved countless lives in their operating room. "I have the chief of police's direct number," Dr. Chen said, already dialing. "He was one of our patients last month, that spinal surgery you consulted on." The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The very person Barrett was discriminating against had helped save his boss's ability to walk just weeks ago. The shopping center's security team had already forwarded their crystal-clear footage to the police department. The cameras had captured everything. Barrett's unnecessary aggression, Dr. Williams's calm compliance, and the obvious abuse of power that followed. The footage was already being reviewed by wide-eyed dispatchers who couldn't believe what they were seeing. Barrett, still driving the stolen Mercedes, was feeling quite pleased with himself. He flipped through the car's radio stations, not noticing the GPS tracking light on the dashboard. He was too busy imagining how he would write up this incident in his report, already crafting the lies he would tell to justify his actions. But technology and truth were about to collide with his plans. The car's built-in cellular system was connecting to the manufacturer's emergency response center. Each turn he made was being logged. Each minute he spent in the stolen vehicle was being documented with satellite precision. Modern technology was weaving a web of evidence around him that no amount of false paperwork could explain away. Back in the parking lot, more support arrived for Dr. Williams. The local news blogger's tweets had caught fire online, and a reporter from the nearby news station happened to be in the area. The story was spreading faster than Barrett could drive, his actions being condemned in real time by thousands of social media users who were tired of seeing such abuse of power. Dr. Chen had managed to reach both the police chief and the hospital's legal team. "The chief is livid," he told Dr. Williams, whose professional demeanor remained intact despite the situation. "They're tracking the car's GPS right now. Every patrol unit in the area has been alerted." The gathered crowd had grown larger, but instead of just watching, they were actively supporting Dr. Williams. An elderly couple offered her water, a shop owner brought out a chair, and several people shared their contact information, volunteering to be witnesses. This wasn't just a crowd of onlookers anymore. It was a community coming together against injustice. In the distance, sirens began to wail. Barrett was about to discover that his 3 minutes of perceived triumph were up. Justice was racing toward him from all directions, and for the first time in his career, his badge wouldn't be able to shield him from the consequences of his actions. His world was about to change dramatically, all because he chose to judge someone based on appearance rather than character. The sun had almost set completely now, but this story was far from over. In fact, it was about to take a turn that would make Officer Barrett wish he had never laid eyes on that black Mercedes or its accomplished owner. The next few minutes would become a lesson in justice that nobody present would ever forget. The first sign that something was wrong came through Barrett's police radio. The crackle of the dispatcher's voice carried an unusual urgency that made him sit up straighter in the stolen Mercedes's leather seat. "All units be advised. We have reports of an officer involved in an unauthorized vehicle seizure at the city center mall. Any units in the vicinity, please respond." Barrett's hand froze halfway to the radio switch. In his 15 years on the force, he'd never heard his own actions being reported as a crime in progress. The GPS screen on the Mercedes's dashboard blinked steadily, a digital beacon announcing his location to everyone looking for him. His confidence began to crack like thin ice under spring sun. Back at the shopping center, the scene had transformed into something remarkable. Dr. Williams's colleague, Dr. Chen, had just finished a call that would change everything. "The chief of police himself is on his way," he announced to the gathered crowd. "And you won't believe this, he's bringing the commissioner with him." The evening air buzzed with excitement and anticipation. The local news crew that had arrived was interviewing witnesses, their cameras capturing the extraordinary way the community had rallied around Dr. Williams. A young tech-savvy bystander had already created a hashtag that was trending locally, with video clips of Barrett's misconduct spreading across social media platforms. "I've seen this officer around here before," an elderly shop owner told the reporters, shaking his head. "Always strutting around, making people uncomfortable. But this time, he picked on the wrong person." The shop owner went on to describe how Dr. Williams had performed emergency surgery on his granddaughter last year, saving her life after a terrible accident. Dr. Williams was now sitting in a comfortable chair provided by one of the boutique owners, sipping water and speaking calmly with the retired judge who had witnessed everything. She checked her phone. The Mercedes' tracking app showed Barrett's location clear as day, moving through the city streets like a neon sign of his own misdeeds. The first police cruiser arrived with lights flashing but no siren, followed quickly by 3 more. These officers were different, their approach professional and apologetic. The sergeant in charge looked mortified as she introduced herself to Dr. Williams. "Ma'am, I want you to know that this is not what we stand for," she said, her voice carrying genuine regret. "Officer Barrett has been a problem for far too long." Meanwhile, Barrett was beginning to realize just how badly he had miscalculated. His radio crackled again, this time with his supervisor's voice, sharp and commanding. "Officer Barrett, this is Lieutenant Green. Stop your vehicle immediately. I repeat, stop the vehicle now." The recognition in his supervisor's voice made Barrett's stomach turn. They knew exactly who they were looking for. The Mercedes' advanced safety system had kicked in, sending real-time updates not only to the manufacturer's security center, but also to Dr. Williams' smartphone. Each turn Barrett made was being logged and transmitted, creating an irrefutable digital trail of his crimes. The car's built-in cameras were recording his every move, adding to the mountain of evidence piling up against him. In the growing darkness, more police vehicles began converging on Barrett's location. He could see their lights in his rearview mirror, getting closer with each passing second. The same authority he had abused minutes ago was now closing in on him like a net, and for the first time in his career, he felt real fear. Back at the shopping center, Dr. Williams received another surprise. The hospital board chairman had arrived after seeing the trending social media posts. "You know," he said loudly enough for the news cameras to hear, "Dr. Williams didn't just become one of our top neurosurgeons by chance. She worked her way through medical school while raising her younger siblings after their parents passed away. She's performed over 1,000 successful surgeries, many of them for free. And this is how she gets treated." The story was evolving beyond a simple case of police misconduct. It was becoming a powerful narrative about judgment, justice, and the consequences of prejudice. As the police chief's car pulled into the parking lot, lights flashing and dignity restored, everyone knew they were witnessing something historic. Barrett's 3 minutes of power abuse were about to turn into a lifetime of consequences, and the next few moments would prove to be the most dramatic yet. The police radio in Barrett's stolen Mercedes crackled again, but this time it was the chief of police himself speaking. His voice carried the weight of authority that made Barrett's hands start trembling on the steering wheel. "Officer Barrett, this is Chief Wilson. Pull over immediately." That's a direct order. The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Barrett's world began crumbling around him as he spotted 4 police cruisers in his rearview mirror, their lights painting the evening in flashes of blue and red. His phone was buzzing nonstop. Messages from fellow officers who had seen the viral videos of his misconduct. Some were asking what he was thinking, others warning him to stop before he made things worse. The Mercedes' advanced dashboard display showed his location being transmitted in real time. Every turn, every acceleration, every brake was being recorded and sent to both the car's security system and Dr. Williams's phone. Technology had become his invisible prison guard, ensuring there was nowhere to hide. "Officer Barrett, the The chief's voice came through again. "I'm looking at footage of your actions from multiple angles. You have exactly 30 seconds to pull over before I authorize spike strips." The chief's tone left no room for negotiation. This wasn't the usual friendly warning between officers. This was a superior ready to take down one of his own. Finally, reality crashed through Barrett's denial. His hands shaking, he guided the luxury vehicle to the curb. As he put the car in park, he caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. The face looking back at him was pale, sweating, and stripped of all the arrogance it had shown just minutes ago. Police vehicles surrounded the Mercedes within seconds, positioning themselves with tactical precision. Officers emerged with their hands on their holsters, not out of threat, but from the sad necessity of treating a fellow officer as a criminal. The scene attracted nearby pedestrians, who quickly pulled out their phones to record this unexpected turn of events. "Step out of the vehicle with your hands where we can see them," commanded Lieutenant Green, his voice carrying years of disappointment in his subordinates' actions. Barrett complied, his movements mechanical, his police training deserting him in the face of his own wrongdoing. As Barrett stood there, hands raised, the gravity of his situation began to sink in. Through the gaps between police cars, he could see more vehicles arriving, not just patrol cars, but unmarked units from internal affairs. The cavalry wasn't coming to save him. They were coming to judge him. "Your badge and gun, Officer Barrett," Lieutenant Green demanded, his hand extended. The simple action of surrendering his badge, the symbol of authority he had just abused, seemed to physically pain Barrett. His fingers fumbled with the shield that had given him a false sense of power for so many years. Meanwhile, back at the shopping center, Dr. Williams was watching everything unfold on her phone's tracking app. The crowd around her had grown, and a sense of justice being served rippled through the onlookers. The police chief's secretary had arrived with paperwork, not just incident reports, but documents that would ensure Barrett's actions would have permanent consequences. "As of this moment, Officer James Barrett, you are suspended without pay," announced Lieutenant Green, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "You are facing charges of grand theft auto, abuse of power, civil rights violations, and official misconduct." Each charge fell like a hammer blow, demolishing the wall of immunity Barrett had built around himself. Barrett's legs began to shake. "Please," he started, his voice barely a whisper, "I can explain." But there was nothing to explain. The security footage, witness videos, and the Mercedes' own tracking system had captured every moment of his prejudiced actions. Technology, witnesses, and justice had aligned perfectly to ensure there would be no escape from accountability. The sound of more sirens approached. Internal affairs investigators arriving to take control of the scene. Barrett stood there, stripped of his badge and gun, watching his career and freedom slipping away. In just 3 minutes, he had gone from a powerful officer abusing his authority to a suspended cop facing serious criminal charges. The transformation was as complete as it was deserved. The evening breeze carried the murmurs of the gathering crowd, their phones still recording as justice took its course. Barrett's 3 minutes of power had come to an end, but the consequences of his actions were just beginning to unfold. As he was led to a waiting patrol car, the words of the chief of police echoed in his mind. "The badge is meant to protect and serve, not to privilege and abuse." Barrett stood surrounded by his fellow officers, but there was no camaraderie in their faces now. The evening air felt thick with tension as internal affairs investigators approached, their badges gleaming under the streetlights. His hands were trembling as he watched Lieutenant Green accessing his personnel file on a department tablet. Over 50 civilian complaints in the past 3 years alone, Lieutenant Green read aloud, his voice heavy with disappointment. Racial profiling, excessive force, unauthorized stops. He looked up from the screen, meeting Barrett's eyes. "We gave you chances, Barrett. So many chances." The words hung in the air like a final judgment. The Mercedes sat quietly nearby, its expensive black paint reflecting the flashing police lights. Inside the car, the dashboard camera had recorded every moment of Barrett's joyride, including his muttered comments that would later become crucial evidence. Modern technology had become a silent witness to his downfall. "Please," Barrett began again, his voice cracking. "I was just doing my job." But before he could continue, Chief Wilson stepped forward, his face stern with controlled anger. "Your job?" the chief questioned, holding up his phone displaying the viral videos of Barrett's misconduct. "Your job was to protect and serve, not to harass and steal." More police vehicles arrived at the scene, including a mobile command unit. The department was treating this incident with the seriousness it deserved. Nearby residents had gathered at a safe distance, their phones recording as justice unfolded before their eyes. Some were live streaming the scene, ensuring that transparency would prevail. A young officer who had once looked up to Barrett watched from her patrol car, shaking her head in disbelief. She remembered how Barrett had bragged about his methods during roll call, how he dismissed warnings about his behavior as political correctness gone mad. Now she was witnessing the consequences of unchecked prejudice and power abuse. "Let's review your actions today," the internal affairs investigator began, his voice professional but stern. "You profiled a respected neurosurgeon, ignored valid vehicle documentation, and stole her car, all while being recorded by multiple witnesses and security cameras." He paused, letting each point sink in. "Would you like to explain your reasoning to us?" Barrett's face had lost all color. The realization that his actions would have consequences was finally hitting him. His usual excuses felt hollow even to his own ears. The weight of his badge had always shielded him from consequences, but now that shield was gone, leaving him exposed to the full force of accountability. From the growing crowd of onlookers, someone called out, "That's the officer who harassed my brother last month." Another voice joined in. "He threatened to arrest my daughter for looking suspicious in her own neighborhood." Years of complaints were suddenly finding their voice, encouraged by the sight of Barrett finally facing justice. Chief Wilson received a call on his phone. It was from the mayor's office. The incident had already reached City Hall, and the administration wanted to ensure swift and appropriate action. The chief's responses were clear and firm. "Yes, sir. We're handling it right now. No special treatment. This ends today." The internal affairs investigators began their formal process, reading Barrett his rights, not as a police officer, but as a suspect. The same words he had spoken to countless others were now being directed at him. Each right echoed in his ears like the toll of a bell marking the end of his career. "I've got 20 years on the force," Barrett pleaded, his voice barely a whisper now. "Doesn't that count for something?" Lieutenant Green's response was immediate and firm. "It counts for 20 years of responsibility that you've just thrown away. 20 years during which you should have known better." As Barrett was led to a waiting patrol car, the same type he had used to intimidate others countless times before, the irony was lost on no one. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Department issue, probably from the same supply he had used throughout his career. His walk to the patrol car was being recorded by dozens of phones, the footage already spreading across social media platforms. The night air carried the murmur of justice being served, of a community witnessing accountability in action. Barrett's 3 minutes of power abuse had led to this moment of reckoning, and there would be no going back. As the patrol car's door closed behind him, he finally understood what real law enforcement was about. Not power over others, but service to all. Back at the shopping center, Dr. Williams stood with quiet dignity as the police chief's convoy arrived. The parking lot had become an impromptu gathering of support, with local residents, shop owners, and even some of her former patients joining the crowd. The evening air hummed with conversation and the occasional cheer as news of Barrett's arrest spread. Chief Wilson stepped out of his vehicle, his face set with determination. He walked directly to Dr. Williams, removed his hat, and did something rare for a police chief. He offered a genuine public apology. "Dr. Williams, on behalf of our entire department, I want to apologize for the inexcusable actions of our former officer." The word former rippled through the crowd. The chief wasn't waiting for lengthy investigations or bureaucratic procedures. Swift action was being taken, and everyone present could feel the winds of change blowing through their community. Dr. Chen, still standing supportively beside his colleague, shared something with the gathered news crews. Just last week, Dr. Williams spent 16 hours in surgery, saving the life of a child whose family couldn't afford medical care. That's who Officer Barrett chose to harass today. The revelation added another layer of irony to Barrett's actions. The police chief's next words captured everyone's attention. "We've reviewed the body camera footage," he announced, his voice carrying across the parking lot. Officer Barrett's comments during the incident reveal a pattern of prejudiced behavior that has no place in our department. The chief paused, making eye contact with the news cameras. His termination is effective immediately. Inside the mobile command center that had been set up nearby, investigators were piecing together Barrett's history. Computer screens displayed complaint after complaint, each one showing a pattern that should have been addressed long ago. The department's internal affairs team worked quickly, building a case that would ensure Barrett's actions wouldn't be forgotten or minimized. Dr. Williams's phone buzzed with messages of support from colleagues and community members. One message particularly stood out. It was from a young medical student who had witnessed the incident. "Dr. Williams, watching you handle that situation with such grace taught me more about strength and dignity than any textbook ever could." The security footage from the shopping center was being reviewed on multiple screens. Each angle showed the same story: Barrett's unwarranted aggression, Dr. Williams's calm composure, and the community's immediate response. The footage would later become part of police training programs, teaching future officers how not to behave. A young officer approached Dr. Williams with the keys to her Mercedes, handling them with respect that bordered on reverence. "Your car has been fully documented for evidence," she explained, "but it's ready for you now." The officer paused, then added quietly, "I went into law enforcement to prevent things like this, not cause them." The crowd had grown larger, but it wasn't an angry mob seeking vengeance. Instead, it was a community coming together to support one of their own and to witness positive change in action. People shared stories of their own experiences, finding strength in unity and hope in the swift response to injustice. Local business owners from the shopping center stepped forward, offering statements to the police and media. The owner of a small cafe spoke about how Dr. Williams would sometimes stop by after long surgeries, always taking time to ask about his family. Another mentioned how she had helped his mother navigate a complex medical diagnosis, spending extra time to explain everything clearly. The police chief's phone kept buzzing. Calls from city council members, the mayor's office, and even state representatives. This incident was becoming a catalyst for change, and everyone wanted to be on the right side of history. The chief's responses were consistent. "Yes, we're taking immediate action." "No, this won't be swept under the rug." "Yes, there will be systemic changes." As the evening's events were broadcast live on local news, viewers across the city watched a story not just of injustice, but of community, accountability, and change. Dr. Williams's composure, the community's support, and the department's swift response were showing everyone how progress is made through unity, determination, and unwavering commitment to what's right. The air grew cooler as night settled in, but nobody was leaving. They all knew they were witnessing something important, a moment when justice wasn't just a word, but an action, swift and certain. Barrett's 3 minutes of power had sparked a movement that would ripple through the department and the community for years to come. 1 month after the incident, the city council chambers were packed to capacity. The morning sun streamed through tall windows as Dr. Williams approached the podium, her presence commanding the attention of every person in the room. She was there to testify about her experience, but more importantly, to help shape new policies that would prevent similar incidents in the future. "What happened to me wasn't just about one officer," she began, her voice clear and steady. "It's about a system that allowed such behavior to continue unchecked. The council members leaned forward, hanging on every word. Among them sat the police chief, who had become an unexpected ally in pushing for departmental reform. In the months since Barrett's arrest, the incident had sparked a nationwide conversation. The security footage, witness videos, and Barrett's own body camera had been viewed millions of times. But unlike many viral police incidents that faded from public memory, this one was different. It was leading to real change. Barrett's case had moved through the justice system with unusual speed. His previous record, combined with the overwhelming evidence from the incident, had left his attorney with few options. The prosecutor's office had been flooded with similar complaints about Barrett from other community members who finally felt safe coming forward. "Yesterday, I performed brain surgery on a young child," Dr. Williams continued, adjusting her glasses. "That child's father had been pulled over by Officer Barrett last year. He told me he'd been too afraid to file a complaint." The chamber fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the room like a heavy blanket. In the audience, several of Barrett's former colleagues sat in uniform, listening intently. They were part of a new task force created to identify and prevent similar incidents of abuse. The young officer who had returned Dr. Williams's car keys was among them, now leading workshops on community engagement and bias recognition. The police department had undergone significant changes. Every complaint in Barrett's file was being reinvestigated. Officers with multiple complaints were being retrained or reassigned. Body camera footage was now being randomly reviewed by civilian oversight committees. The blue wall of silence was crumbling, replaced by a commitment to transparency and accountability. Local businesses around the shopping center had formed a community watch program, working in partnership with police rather than fear of them. The security guard who had first called for help during the incident was now part of a citizen advisory board, helping bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community. "Change doesn't happen in grand gestures," Dr. Williams told the council. "It happens in small moments, in the choices we make when we think nobody is watching." She shared how her hospital had started offering free health screenings at community events, building trust one interaction at a time. In the back of the chamber, some of the witnesses from that evening sat together. The retired judge who had recorded the incident was now leading a legal clinic, helping others report police misconduct. The shop owners who had supported Dr. Williams had turned their stores into safe spaces where people could report concerns without fear. The police chief stood to address the council after Dr. Williams. "We've implemented new training programs," he announced. "But more importantly, we've changed how we measure success. It's not about the number of arrests anymore. It's about the trust we build, the community we serve." Videos from Barrett's dashcam had become teaching tools in the police academy. New recruits watched in silence as instructors pointed out each warning sign, each moment where intervention could have prevented years of misconduct. The incident had become a powerful lesson in what not to do and why. Dr. Williams's testimony wasn't just about one bad officer or one incident of prejudice. It was about building a better system, about turning 3 minutes of injustice into years of positive change. Her words carried the weight of experience, but also the hope of progress. As she concluded her testimony, the chamber erupted in applause. The city council members were already drafting new oversight legislation. The police department was implementing stricter screening processes for recruits. Real change was happening, not in grand gestures, but in the small daily choices that would prevent future officers Barrett from ever wearing a badge. 6 months after the incident, the courtroom was silent as Barrett stood before the judge. Gone was his police uniform, replaced by a simple suit that seemed to hang loosely on his frame. The last half-year had aged him considerably as he faced the consequences of his actions that fateful evening. "The evidence presented in this case is overwhelming," the judge began, her voice carrying throughout the packed courtroom. "Not only do we have video evidence from multiple sources, but the defendant's own dashboard camera and body camera footage paint a clear picture of abuse of power and racial prejudice." Dr. Williams sat in the front row, surrounded by supporters from the hospital and community. She had taken time off from her busy surgery schedule to be present for this moment, understanding its importance not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever faced similar discrimination. In my 30 years on the bench, the judge continued, I've seen many cases of misconduct, but rarely have I seen such a clear example of someone who betrayed the very principles they swore to uphold. She paused, looking directly at Barrett. The badge you wore was meant to be a symbol of protection, not a tool for intimidation. The prosecutor had presented a compelling case. Beyond the incident with Dr. Williams, they had uncovered dozens of similar complaints that had been buried or ignored. Former victims had come forward, sharing stories that painted a pattern of behavior spanning years. Your actions that day didn't just harm Dr. Williams, the judge stated firmly. They damaged the trust between law enforcement and the community they serve. They reinforced fears that many citizens live with daily. They made everyone less safe. In the gallery, several police officers watched attentively. They weren't there to support their former colleague, but to witness the consequences of unchecked power. The department had already implemented many of the changes Dr. Williams had suggested, and early results showed improved community relations. Barrett's lawyer had attempted to argue for leniency, citing his years of service and family situation. But the evidence was insurmountable. The Mercedes' advanced tracking system had provided precise documentation of every moment. Technology had become an unbiased witness, leaving no room for doubt. Therefore, the judge announced, her voice firm, "This court sentences you to 5 years in state prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are permanently barred from serving in any law enforcement capacity." The sentence fell like a gavel on Barrett's bowed head. As Barrett was led away by court officers, Dr. Williams stood quietly. She wasn't celebrating. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability, about making sure that power came with responsibility. Her composure, maintained throughout the entire ordeal, had become a symbol of dignity in the face of injustice. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered to hear statements. The police chief spoke about the department's ongoing reforms. Community leaders discussed the positive changes already visible in police-community relations. But it was Dr. Williams's brief statement that captured everyone's attention. "Today isn't about one person's punishment," she said softly. "It's about setting a standard, about saying that no one is above the law, and everyone deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of who they are or what they look like." The story had come full circle. What began as 3 minutes of prejudice and power abuse had transformed into a movement for positive change. Police academies across the country had requested copies of the case files to use in training. Community oversight boards were being established in neighboring cities. Real change was happening. As the crowd dispersed, Dr. Williams checked her phone. She had surgery scheduled for the afternoon. Life went on, but it went on differently now. The security cameras at the shopping center still recorded daily life, but they now watched over a community where trust was being rebuilt, one interaction at a time. Barrett's 3 minutes of poor judgment had led to 5 years of consequences, but more importantly, they had sparked a lifetime of positive changes in police procedure, community relations, and social justice. As Dr. Williams drove away in her Mercedes, she knew that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes if people are brave enough to stand up for what's right.